Hey everyone, Rho here. Today we're discussing the Adeptus Custodes and the rumours of their dark cells. Could they truly have a lost Primarch? General spoiler warning to begin, as we will be referencing events from across the Warhammer 40k universe, so you have been warned. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. So the Adeptus Custodes, the Golden Legion and the Watchers of the Throne. Since the earliest days of Terra's unification, they were by their Emperor's side, and ever since have spent their lives in dedication to his protection. Though their earliest days are shrouded in myth, it is undisputable that the Custodes were present for the very birth of the Imperium. While the Emperor and his sigillite may have fallen silent, the Custodes have remained, and they alone are privy to the Imperium's greatest secrets. And this to me is really the factor that just pushes the Custodes over the top in terms of sheer mystique. It's not just the fact that they are the Emperor's own legion, it's the fact that still to this day, 10,000 years later, so many of those dark and hidden truths the Custodes know, and they keep them hidden. For years of our lifetimes, the Custodes remained that unknowable and mysterious enigma. However, with the return of Rabute Guilliman, the Edict of Restraint that he originally enforced 10,000 years earlier was repealed. The Golden Legion were no longer bound to Terra, and so once more they were unleashed upon the galaxy. While them hitting the tabletop was awesome in its own right, for me just getting the rare glimpses and development of their background in all the new codexes was even better. And of all of those, there was none greater than the Shadow Keepers and the dark cells beneath the palace. Now the Shadow Keepers are a shield host of the Adeptus Custodes, entirely dedicated to being the wardens of the dark cells. This vault beneath the palace amounts to the most securely guarded and dangerous of any vault within the Imperium. And it's worth emphasizing here, we're not talking some small jail. The Imperial Palace is immensely vast. We're talking hundreds of miles in size. Any vaults beneath its ancient corridors are beyond imagination. At any one time, there are no less than 100 Custodes on guard. Now what it contains is truly a mystery, though we're given tantalizing hints within each Custodes codex, telling us terrors as far back as Old Night, predating the Great Crusade, and even the unification of Terra itself. Artifacts that defy logic from countless species and times. Threats so grave, they could prove the end of the Imperium, were they taken or allowed to escape. For these cells don't just contain objects, they hold living beings too. Thousands of them. Again, just what these monsters are, we are only given precious teasing glimpses, left to the wildness of our imaginations. However, in the latest Custodes Codex, one of those teasing glimpses gives life to far more imagination than anything else yet. Contained within these dark cells beneath the Imperial Palace is a being we know only as Subject 11. Now anyone who's fairly ingrained into 40k lore knows of course about the Primarchs, and thus most likely has heard of the mysterious lost two Primarchs as well, the second and 11th of the Emperor's sons. The two Primarchs eradicated from history. No names, no records, nothing. Even the remaining Primarchs were barred from speaking of these former kin. So, could this Subject 11 truly be the lost 11th Primarch? Well, if a Primarch were to be imprisoned, there can be little doubt that they would rank alongside these terrors of old night in terms of potential danger. If these dark cells do indeed contain these kind of threats, well then that's exactly where the Primarch would be kept. And in terms of timeline, it would also make a great deal of sense for the Primarch to have been kept upon Terra. As much as everything revolves around the throne world now, it pales in comparison to it in the days of the Great Crusade. This was truly the beating heart of the Imperium. There can be no doubt the lost Primarchs, if captured, were taken to Terra, just as Magnus the Red would be much later on in time. And there can be no doubt also that the only force the Emperor would have trusted to keep such a threat imprisoned would have been his Custodes. They, more than any other force in the Imperium, stand a chance at countering a Primarch, and they alone could be implicitly trusted to keep that knowledge safe. However, with all that said, could a lost son of the Emperor still truly be alive? Well, actually, it just could be possible. We know they are functionally immortal, and as little as we know about them, one of the main things we do know is that they were erased from Imperial record. That doesn't necessarily mean dead. For all the references we have within the lore of them being missed, lost, or gone, there's actually very little in terms of conclusively saying they're dead. It's inferred and implied, but it's never stated. Sure, we have Russ being termed the Emperor's executioner, but that doesn't necessarily have to mean he's killed them both. Maybe he could have slayed one. Maybe it could be a reference to killing the legions. Once their Primarch was gone, in effect 2 legions did cease to exist. Or quite simply, the title is just what it is. The threat is merely implied. We also have the term for the lost Primarchs being the Forgotten and the Purged. The latter could be seen to have been killed, whereas the former absolutely screams more imprisoned to me. So for all the belief that they are dead, and I agree that is almost certainly the case, we just can't say for certain. And so it does leave open the possibility that maybe they are alive. And in line with that possibility, we have also seen a very eye-opening history of secrets of the lost Primarchs and upon Terra itself. And this came from the Horus Heresy short story, The Chamber at the End of Memory, by James Swallow. Now, if you haven't read this one, definitely go and check it out, because this is just one of those stellar little short stories that we seem to get in the Horus Heresy series in particular, where it just contains some real eye-opening interaction between 2 major characters. And this was set during the days of the Heresy, when Rogel was continuing to fortify the Imperial Palace. And there's a particular section of the palace that Malcador has told him to stay away from, to make sure he leaves it as it is. However, through the events of the short story, Rogel finds himself investigating this area, And very much to his surprise, he stumbles across a lot of psychic booby traps, designed to keep anyone and anything out. However, undeterred and determined as ever, Rogel actually breaks the Nicaea decree and calls down one of his librarians to help him navigate in further, which they do, ultimately stumbling across a huge set of intricately carved doors containing the numerals of the 2nd and 11th Primarch. And this is where things get really interesting. This is one of the few times in the lifetime of Rogel Dawn you actually get a glimpse of the Primarch losing his normally stoic composure. Because this isn't where the quarters should be. All the quarters of his brothers are located on completely the other side of the palace, which, considering its size, is many miles away. And even in trying to think about his lost brothers and these doors, Rogel struggles to focus his memory. Something for a Primarch that's absolutely absurd. Now, of course, it's not long before Malcador himself arrives, and a pretty heated argument between the two ensued. A completely confused and angered Rogel Dawn accusing the Sigillite of ever more lies. And here in this conversation, we got some of the most revealing information regarding the lost 2 Primarchs we have ever seen yet. Firstly, we got to know that many of the Primarchs did not get to meet the lost 2. Rogel himself did, albeit only briefly. So we know they were gone fairly early on in the Great Crusade. However, more importantly than that, Malcador simply asks Rogel, "Have you ever wondered why everything about them is so vague?" And here, Rogel, as loyal to his father as ever, merely puts it down to the oath all the Primarchs made to never speak of the lost 2. But Malcador then asks Rogel to tell him their names, and Rogel can't. It appears all the memories of the Primarchs regarding their lost brothers were altered. The real reason the lost Primarchs are barely spoken of is because the brothers who remain simply can't really remember them. Sure, they know they have 2 lost brothers, but as we see here with Rogel, when it comes to truly focusing on the details, he simply can't. And unbelievably, we find out this wasn't even the Emperor's or Malcador's idea. This was actually the suggestion of Dawn himself and Guilliman, because the fate of the 2 lost brothers was such a blow that it threatened the heart of the entire crusade. So we now know memories of the lost Primarchs were altered. Things that should be remembered simply aren't. We know chambers for the lost 2 brothers were located on the other side of the palace, away from the rest of their brothers, or at least where they originally were. And we also know they were kept behind extremely intense security. And we know, along with that the legionaries of the lost 2 legions were seen as not at fault. Their Primarchs alone bore their burden, and as such the legionaries themselves were spared. Just what was in those sealed chambers we never get to see, but it's definitely worth asking the question now: if the lost 2 Primarchs were indeed dead, why not simply destroy their quarters? They weren't needed anymore. Why relocate their chambers to a distant side of the palace? Why keep them behind such intense psychic security? Why go through all the length of trouble of telling Dawn, who's trying to fortify the palace, to stay away from this particular area? In the very fight for your lives, if these chambers were indeed empty, why not simply allow him to bulldoze them to the ground? Is it just possible that one, or maybe both of the lost Primarchs were still jailed behind those doors? Man, as unlikely as you think it should be, once you start asking those questions, you do really begin to wonder. Why would Rogel and Rabute seek to bury the memories of their brothers? Sure, they could be dead, a means to cope with the grief. But is it just possible it was more a means to deal with the knowledge they had a brother in jail upon Terra? If the Primarchs had knowledge of one of their brothers within a cell, would that fester within them? Would they feel the desire to come and speak with him? Again, in my mind, it's certainly possible. We saw Russ risk it all to confront his brother Horus one last time. In my mind, it is certainly possible. In fact, I feel that it's far more reasonable for blurring the memory than, well, a simple death. The knowledge of a Primarch jailed, but still living, is not one that's going to go away. Whereas if they had simply died, yes, it would be painful, but you can move past it. And then the fact their legions were spared. Again, as always, this is just my personal opinion, but if the legionaries were spared, then the likelihood of the lost Primarchs not having been executed does go up somewhat in my mind. For if the sin was truly that grave, then you would have expected their legionaries to be wiped out along with them, to ensure the problem does not live on. However, as we now know for certain, they did not. It's no longer just a rumour. The legionaries of the two lost Primarchs were indeed spared from death. It's really interesting to think about. Could one of the lost Primarchs have been within this chamber? It's the closest we have ever got to maybe seeing a lost Primarch. Maybe one was stored within this chamber, and then before the siege moved down to the dark cells beneath the palace. I don't think you can rule it out. I just don't see a reason for moving and keeping the chambers behind such high security if there wasn't something or someone to keep within it. Someone worth keeping. The eradication of the lost two Primarchs is probably one of the biggest ticks in the cold-hearted Emperor column. However, we saw with Magnus, the Emperor's intent was not for Russ to kill him, instead to bring him to Terra. And we saw later in the events of Fury of Magnus, the Emperor offered Magnus his redemption, which as history knows was declined. It certainly seems the Emperor would try and keep his Primarchs if there was any real alternative to help him do so. Even now, 10,000 years later, we've seen him tell a demon-elevated Mortarion that someday he might still be saved. Is it through feelings of fatherhood, or a warlord needing his generals? We've seen his lament at the loss of Ferrus, and his intent to do something about it. Is it just possible, given all of this, the Emperor didn't want to kill the lost Primarchs too? That maybe they were kept, for the Emperor to try someday to fix whatever was wrong. Can you really rule it out 100%? Given the glimpses we continue to get, and admittedly taking a leap or two here or there, it's certainly looking more likely than ever. But as always guys, what do you think? Is the Custodes Mysterious Subject 11 one of the lost Primarchs. Why would Malcador go to all that trouble of moving their chambers, of installing such strong security, if there was not something within that chamber? And if it wasn't one of the lost Primarchs, then just what was it? As always guys, leave your thoughts in the comments below, I love to read them. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. And if you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.